Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to what I think is going to be a truly fascinating conversation. I'd like to welcome those people who are in the room and also those who are watching online. And we are extremely honored today to have the Prime Minister of Vietnam, Prime Minister Phạm Minh Chính, to talk to us. He has made a tremendous effort to be here, I should say. He has not only come a long way, but he's also appeared, even though the cold weather in Davos has been quite a shock to the system, and he's struggling with not feeling so well. So, first of all, can I say a very big thank you on behalf of us all for coming here today. It's great to have you.
I have to thank you in turn because you have given me such an auspicious discussion today with the effort of both sides, the organizers. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, Vietnam is an absolutely fascinating country because in the last 40 years, in the period of Doi Moi, you have achieved quite remarkable transformation of the economy and really blazed a trail in terms of economic development. And before our conversation today, I spoke to a number of large investors about Vietnam, and they all praised the path the country has been on in the last 4 decades. They also, however, raised questions for the future. You had 7% growth last year. You're aiming for 10 to 12% next year. You have good FDI figures. You have good investment, inflation, and fiscal figures. So that's all wonderful. The questions that the investment community has is, firstly, there has been political upheaval in the last couple of years, which has hurt the economic trajectory. And the new government that's in place is bringing stability, but they primarily come from a non-economic background, a security background. So the first question the investors have is, how will you deliver good economic policies going forward? The second question is that obviously there has been questions about the environmental cost of this rapid development. So I'd love to ask you that. And the third question that people ask is, you have benefited by many global companies appreciating your developments and moving supply chains to Vietnam. But in an era where we have growing US-Chinese confrontation and geopolitical problems, how will you navigate that going forward? So these are the questions that the investors here in Davos are keen to hear about. But I know that you actually wanted to start with a different question. So, out of respect to the long journey you've traveled, I will start with a question that you really wanted to talk about first, which was artificial intelligence. So, I understand that you're keen to tell us, first of all, about how Vietnam is grappling with the challenge of an intelligent age. So perhaps you can start by telling us about that, and then we can move on to some of the other questions that have been raised by participants in the forum when they look at the remarkable development of Vietnam in recent years.
Thank you for the questions and a very fascinating discussion. I can say that Vietnam is a developing country. Vietnam is an economy in transition. From a very low starting point. After 40 years of war, 30 years of embargo, Vietnam must therefore make a lot of effort over the past decades to be where we are today. That is the common effort of the entire Vietnamese nation. In the spirit of great national unity and solidarity, the greater the challenge, the greater the effort we put to it. That is a Vietnamese culture. In 2024, a lot of challenges face Vietnam. On top of the global landscape, there's also a change in the generation of leadership without warning. This was a difficulty, but we were able to rapidly put things under control so that everything continues as they are, so that our work is continued and the effort and the solidarity is maintained across the whole country within the difficult backdrop. This, of course, was followed by the Yagi super typhoon, which caused a lot of destruction over the 26 provinces in the northern part of Vietnam. So that is Vietnam's landscape in 2024. That is the two events that characterized 2024. There were a lot of changes in leadership, and then there was the Yagi super typhoon. And there are other things as well, but that is what we share with the rest of the world. Now, on artificial intelligence, I think that the smart era is opening up, and what I think personally on this is that this is an era where there has to be political stability, where there has to be peace rather than war, because that would facilitate rapid economic development and sustainable development. That is also an age where we have to make good use of the environment to ensure sustainability. It is an era where we have to ensure social progress and equality to leave no one behind. That is what I believe that will characterize the smart era. It goes hand in hand with artificial intelligence, that goes hand in hand in turn with database. And the challenge that faces today is that we need to come up with a vision that by 2045, Vietnam must be a developed, high-income country. And given how low our starting position is, given that we are an economy in transition and our resilience is still limited, the greatest challenge we have is concerning big data, a big database, because without that we cannot have a good foundation for artificial intelligence. And the Vietnamese upon the Vietnamese database, and there are still difficulties that we are facing in creating and sharing a database, or to out of this develop a national artificial intelligence and connect it with the database of all ministries, agencies, localities, and so forth. So the big question here is to build a big database for the Vietnamese nation. So what we're doing here is we're issuing legal instruments and policies on the development of artificial intelligence. And this is doing very well over the past 2 years. The second thing that we have to do is to build a national database to connect everything within Vietnam together. And we hope to be able to complete a national database by June this year. And based on that, we can establish Vietnam's own national artificial intelligence. So that is what I think on this topic.
Well, thank you. I think many people inside Vietnam would applaud this. In the business community, there has long been a concern about the fact that much of the manufacturing activity has been low value at the lower end of the supply chain. However, one of the features of Vietnam in recent years is that R&D investment has been much lower than elsewhere in East Asia. Do you plan as a government to create incentives, financial incentives, to encourage more research and development investment, or to find other ways to encourage companies to raise their level of R&D activity?
Yes, on research and development, we are admittedly not investing as much on R&D compared to other countries in the region, because one of the biggest things that characterize Vietnam is that Vietnam has a very low starting point, and we are a developing country in transition. And that means there are difficulties when it comes to R&D. That being said, over the past few years, we have been improving the legal system and policy instruments to encourage and harness resources, both private, public, and investors, both domestic and internal and international, to pour into R&D. And Vietnam has been arriving at incentive policies. For example, Samsung invested into an R&D $100 million just a year back. And with this incentive, they continue to invest more into another R&D center in the Lang Hoa La complex. And most notably, NVIDIA, Mr. Jason Huang, who has been in discussion with us, he is an R&D man, and there are a number of R&D centers that are under work and with him, and of course we have to set aside a certain budget for R&D, and we have just issued a resolution concerning science, technology, R&D, innovation, and so these a 2% budget for research, 3 to 4% on development, and so on and so forth. And if we want not to fall behind, there has to be ample resources, financial resources, investing into this, and there has to be incentives and policies for this. Secondly, this also means investing into human beings. This means investing into education, training. For example, for the training of 50,000 engineers in semiconductor and artificial intelligence, for example.
Right. Well, if you manage to train that many engineers rapidly, I think you'll show a framework or template for many other countries.
This is a very interesting question indeed. Of course, this begins with lawmaking to ensure equality between domestic and international investors. This also means ensuring IP rights. This is part of every FTA, and this is always the hardest thing to negotiate. For example, when we negotiate with the US, this topic alone took 5 years. IP rights, that took 5 years. This also means infrastructure. We have to invest into infrastructure so that companies, both Vietnamese and international, would be able to make you.
Are you concerned that you will become a target for the new administration in America? Because we've had indications that they want to focus on countries with big trade surpluses with America. And can you reassure the companies that are the international companies that are putting money into Vietnam that they won't find themselves caught in the same set of trade conflicts that they've had with China and the US in the future?
You are very right. Of course, Vietnam is ranking third in trade surplus vis-a-vis the US. China, Mexico, then it comes Vietnam. More than 100 billion. So this is a big question. As the global landscape may change, an administration may change, but at the same time, we do not fear what is to come, because with the US, we have proposed a few measures to rebalance trade. For example, we are purchasing more planes from the US because we are developing the Vietnamese tourism industry as a spearhead sector, which means we need, and that means purchasing from Boeing, which is an American company. We seek to buy 50 to 100 planes over the next 10 years, and this will help to rebalance these bilateral trade. And there are other high-tech items of the US that we're interested in as well. So there are solutions in place. There are political solutions and diplomatic solutions to bolster mutual understanding between the two countries. There are economic solutions, and there are institutional solutions. This means trade agreements that we have been signing with other countries, including with the US. We are negotiating an adjustment of agreements we have signed with the US. So with all of this in mind, we do not have too much concern about this. And of course, we do not want trade wars in the world. This era, the smart era, should be one without unhealthy competition. It must be an era of stable politics, an era of peace, not war, an era of stable economic development, an era where the development among countries are in balance and where countries can stand together against the challenge of our time. I think that would and should characterize the smart era today, because in every time there's difficulties, it would behoove us to work together. That is why Vietnam's motto is we have to share benefits and harmonize risk. Because in times of trade war, it would cause a lot of trouble, but Vietnam's President Ho Chi Minh has a very famous poem that roughly translates, goes that there's nothing difficult as long as our heart is in the right place, whether we are digging the mountain or leveling a sea. As long as there's a will, there's a way. There's a lot of things that we have in place. There are political solutions, economic solutions, and we have all these in place to avoid trade conflicts in the world today.
Right. Well, I think everybody in the Congress Center would thoroughly agree with that sentiment. I don't think many people here want to see trade wars at all, so you're speaking to a group of people who strongly agree with you. However, it's quite striking that the Trump administration has already, just today, last 24 hours, announced 25% tariff against Mexico, which is the second biggest trade surplus. They're threatening a whole series of tariffs against China. Until now, they've actually not mentioned Vietnam, which is quite striking. And I asked some of the Trump team why, and they said, well, they're waiting to see whether Vietnam will be friendly to America or to China. And they're also waiting to see what happens with Mexico and others. So I have two questions, Prime Minister. The first is, are you going to be able to stay friends?
Smart in that sense. And unlike China, we are not a direct competitor to the US, not in trade, not in investment. This is looking at the facts as they are. And our trade surplus vis-à-vis China, vis-à-vis the US, is not that large.
In absolute terms, no. Do you plan, have you spoken yet with the Trump team? Do you plan to go to Mar-a-Lago to see the president? And I have to ask a question, having just been in Japan, where I spent many years in Japan, many Japanese now say, what a pity that Ishiba-san, the leader of Japan, stopped playing golf 30 years ago. If only he played golf like Prime Minister Abe, Japan would be in a much better position. Do you plan to play golf with President Trump?
First, we've talked with, and we will no want to exploit this relationship to further complicate the situation. But on the other hand, we also enjoy good cooperation and relations with other countries, but without disappointing the U.S. in the spirit of harmonized interest and sharing risk. To play golf, and if it can bring about the interest to the country, the benefit to the country, and I can play golf the whole day long.
Right, but I think make sure that when you do play golf, you have plenty of television cameras, and make sure you let President Trump win. Or maybe offer to build a whole bunch more golf courses in Vietnam.
I won't be afraid because I play golf to bring about the benefit to our people, to our countries. So I don't worry about it.
Right.
I stand ready to be broadcasted, to be on the media for the interest of our nation and
Well,
people.
40, 50 years ago, we had ping pong for peace in China. We can now have golf for peace. So on a more serious note, though, the other question I want to ask, we're almost out of time, the environmental questions. Vietnam, tragically, has suffered directly the consequence of climate change. What do you plan to do to help address these issues? Because obviously your rapid development, your such impressive development has come at some environmental damaging cost.
Yes, it is true that Vietnam is one of the 5 countries worst affected by climate change going forward. Climate change and sea level rise, because we have a coastline of 3,000 kilometers. So Vietnam is one of the countries that would stand to be damaged by sea level rise. Vietnam has made the commitment along with the international community to net zero. And we've made the commitment to green transition, green transport, and green production, green manufacturing, as I said before. This means protecting the environment. And Vietnam, when you go into the details, in the Mekong Delta, for example, Vietnam has just got a project for 1 million hectare of high-quality, low-emission rice cultivation to help to contribute to global food security while still ensuring green farming. We have another project, another program to address issues that has to do with droughts, floods, and land depression. Let's take another example.
Thank you very much indeed, Prime Minister. I'm very grateful for the conversation. It's been truly fascinating. I personally take away 2 or 3 key points. The first is that Vietnam has indeed had this remarkable trajectory of development in the last 4 decades, to look at the legal structures around that, and to try and upgrade your manufacturing base into higher value products. And last but not least, of course, the biggest challenge is going to be navigating this very difficult tightrope in the new geopolitics. It's possible to walk that tightrope. So, whether or not you play golf, I'll just say to you, good luck on behalf of us all, and thank you.
Thank you. We will develop in this new era, in this smart era, based on science and innovation and digital transformation. So this will be a very important framework. This is also a revolution. Hand in hand with this, that is a revolution to keep a good tightrope between the countries in the world to bring about benefit that we share for peace, cooperation, and development.
I think if Vietnam can achieve that, then there will be many, many people